I will give you a video script of one of my old videos. Your task is to paraphrase the script, just changing the word order slightly, keeping the same writing and articulating style. After 50 years of slavery, the widow bought an abandoned house. But inside, she found something shocking that would change everything. Can you imagine a woman who spent her entire life serving, finally free, but carrying the weight of half a century of pain? It seems impossible, but this story happened in the American South in 1865. Before we continue, go ahead and subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because what this woman found in that house will leave you speechless. It's a discovery that touches the soul. And tell me in the comments what city you're watching from. I'd love to know how far these powerful stories are reaching. The story I'm going to tell you happened in June 1865, just weeks after the end of the Civil War, in the small town of Natchez, Mississippi. It was a time of transformation, when America finally abolished slavery and thousands of people found themselves free, but lost, not knowing where to go or how to survive. Freedom had arrived on paper, but reality was very different. For many, freedom was just the right to starve with dignity. Benita was 63 years old when the war ended. She was a woman with dark skin marked by the relentless sun of the cotton fields, calloused hands full of scars, back curved from decades of carrying weight. Her eyes, however, still held a spark of something that hadn't been destroyed by all those years. Strength. Benedita had been born enslaved on the Riverside Plantation, property of Colonel Augustus Whitmore, and had worked that land for as long as she could remember. She never knew her biological parents. Her mother had died in childbirth, and her father, according to what she was told as a child, had been sold to another plantation before she was born. At 13, Benedita was given as a wedding gift to the colonel's daughter, Miss Amelia, when she married a plantation owner from Natchez. That's how Benedita left the plantation where she was born and began serving in the big house of another property. There she met Joachim, an enslaved man who worked in the stables. Joachim was tall, strong, had a smile that lit up the darkest day, and a deep voice that sang African songs he'd learned from the elders. They fell in love in the way that was possible for people who had no rights, even over their own bodies. They stole moments, glances, whispers in the slave quarters after the day's work. When Benedita was 16, she and Joachim asked the master for permission to marry. It was a simple ceremony without legal value, but some masters allowed it to keep the enslaved people calmer. Permission was granted, and they married in a quick ceremony conducted by the plantation chaplain. There was no party, no celebration, but that night, lying on the dirt floor of the quarters, they felt richer than any landowner. The following years brought both joy and suffering. Benedita had 6 children. Each pregnancy was a miracle torn from cruelty, each birth a victory against all odds. But slavery didn't spare children. 3 of her children died before age 5, victims of disease, malnutrition, and early labor. The other 3 grew strong, but at 12 years old, each was sold to different plantations. Benedita never saw them again. The pain of having her children ripped from her arms was something no words could describe. It was like tearing pieces from her soul and throwing them to the wind. Joachim tried to rebel once, when the overseer threatened to sell their oldest son. Joachim pushed the man and tried to run away with the boy. They didn't get far. They were captured the same day, and Joachim was punished publicly, whipped until his back became a bloody mass of flesh and bone. Benedita was forced to watch along with all the other enslaved people as a lesson of what happened to those who defied the order. Joachim survived, but something in him died that day. The spark of rebellion was replaced by a silent resignation that broke Benedita's heart. Years passed. Benedictita, and Joim grew old together, their bodies bending under the weight of work, their hands becoming twisted claws from arthritis. But they had each other, and that was everything. At night, lying in the quarters, they whispered impossible dreams. One day, Joachim would say, "One day we'll be free. We'll have our own land, our own house, and we'll find our children." Benedita wanted to believe, but the years had taught her that hope was a dangerous luxury. In 1864, when Benedita was 62, Joachim got sick. It was a fever that wouldn't break, a cough that tore pieces from his lungs. He worked until he could no longer stand. The master didn't call a doctor. Old slaves weren't worth the investment. Joachim died on a cold July night in Benedita's arms, whispering that he loved her and asking her to be strong. The burial was rushed in a corner of the slave cemetery, without a headstone, without ceremony. Just Benedita and a few companions from the quarters to throw dirt on the rough wooden coffin. Joachim's death broke something inside Benedita. She continued working because she had no choice. But it was as if she was just waiting for her own death to come. And then less than a year later, in April 1865, came the news that changed everything. The war was over. General Lee had surrendered. They were free. The news reached the plantation on a Sunday afternoon. The master gathered all the enslaved people in the yard and read the proclamation with a voice that mixed anger and resignation. "You're free now," he said. "You can leave whenever you want." But there was no joy in his voice. There was only the bitterness of someone losing a fortune overnight. Some people cried with joy. Others stood in silence, not knowing what to feel. Benedita just stood there processing what it meant, free. After 63 years, 50 of which she could clearly remember, she was free. But free for what? Free to go where? She had no house, no money, no family. Joachim was dead. Her children were lost somewhere in America, if they were still alive. In the following days, many formerly enslaved people left the plantation. Some went to town to try their luck. Others just wandered aimlessly with nowhere to go. The master offered paid work to those who wanted to stay, but the payment was miserable and the conditions almost the same as before. Benedita stayed for a few weeks, working for pennies, saving each coin as if it were gold. She had a dream that Joachim had planted in her mind so many years ago, to have her own house. A place that was hers, where no one could send her away, where she could simply exist in peace for the years she had left. It was a simple dream, but it seemed impossible. How could a black woman, old, illiterate, and without resources, buy a house? But Benedita had something that slavery hadn't managed to take from her: determination. For 3 months, she worked at everything she could find. She washed clothes for families in town, cleaned houses, carried water from the river, sold vegetables she grew on a piece of land that a former master allowed her to use. Every penny was kept in a cloth tied at her waist, hidden under her patched skirt. The other black women in town, many also formerly enslaved, joined her. They formed a support network, sharing food, temporary shelter, work. Miss Joseph, a 50-year-old midwife, shared her small house with Benedita. Miss Maria, who sold pastries in the square, always saved the day's leftovers to share. Mr. Thomas, a free black man who had a small carpentry shop, offered work when he could. It was Mr. Thomas who told Benedita about the house. One afternoon, while she was delivering clean laundry to his shop, he mentioned it casually. "There's an old house on the outskirts of town," he said. "Been abandoned for years. The owner died in the war and his widow moved north. She's selling it for almost nothing, just wants to get rid of it." Benedita's heart raced. "How much is almost nothing, Mr.?" Thomas scratched his gray beard. "Heard she's asking 50. It's falling apart, mind you. Roof's got holes, windows are broken, probably got rats and worse. But it's a house. It's got 4 walls, and it's on a piece of land. The 50. Benita had been saving for 3 months and had 40 cents. It was so close yet so far. She worked even harder in the following weeks. She took every job offered, no matter how difficult or degrading. She cleaned out, scrubbed floors on her knees until they bled, carried loads that would make a younger person cry. Every muscle in her body screamed in pain, but she didn't stop. Miss Joseph and the other women saw what she was doing and started a collection. "We're all in this together," Joseph said, putting $3 in Benedita's hand. "When you get your house, it'll be a victory for all of us. It'll show them we can do it." By late August, Benita had the money, or 53.75, every penny earned with sweat and pain. She wrapped the money in a clean cloth, tucked it inside her dress, and went to find the widow who was selling the house. Mrs. Catherine Morrison lived in a boarding house on Main Street. She was a thin woman in her 40s with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and eyes that looked like they'd cried all their tears. When Benita knocked on her door, Mrs. Morrison opened it and looked surprised to see a black woman standing there. "Can I help you?" Her voice was cautious but not unkind. "Yes, ma'am," Benita said, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered, as she'd been taught all her life. "I heard you have a house for sale. The old Pendleton place on Creek Road." Mrs. Morrison's eyebrows rose. "You're interested in buying it?"
"Yes, Mom."
"I have the money." Benita pulled out the cloth bundle. Mrs. Morrison stared at the money, then at Benedicta, then back at the money. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Benedita's heart pounded. Would the woman refuse to sell to her, just because of the color of her skin? It wouldn't be the first time something like that happened in this new world of so-called freedom. Finally, Mrs. Morrison sighed. "That house, I should warn you, it's in terrible condition. My husband's uncle lived there alone for 20 years before he died. He let it fall apart. There's barely a roof left. I can fix it, ma'am," Benedita said quietly. "I've worked with my hands my whole life. I can make it livable." Morrison looked at her for another long moment, and something in her expression softened. "You know what? Good for you. The war took my husband, took my sons. Everything's changed. At least something good can come from all this loss." She took the money and counted it. 50 was the price. "Come back tomorrow morning and we'll go to the courthouse to make it official." Benedita could barely believe it. "Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much." That night, she could barely sleep. The next morning, she put on her best dress, the one she'd been saving for special occasions, and met Mrs. Morrison at the courthouse. The clerk, a young man with ink-stained fingers, looked skeptical when Mrs. Morrison explained what they were there for. "You're selling property to her." He gestured at Benedita as if she were invisible. "I am," Mrs. Morrison said firmly. "Do you have a problem with that?" The clerk shrugged. "Just making sure you know what you're doing. These people." He didn't finish the sentence, but the disdain was clear. "These people," Mrs. Morrison said coldly, "have just as much right to own property as anyone else. Now, are you going to process this sale, or do I need to speak to your supervisor?" The transaction was completed, though the clerk made them wait longer than necessary and was rudder than he needed to be. But finally, Benedita held a piece of paper in her trembling hands. A deed, her name written in ink. Benedita Johnson, owner of property located at 47 Creek Road, Natchez, Mississippi. She couldn't read the words, but Mr. Thomas read them to her later that day, and she cried. Tears of joy. Tears of grief for Joachim, who should have been there to see it. Tears of pride that after 50 years of slavery, she owned something. She owned a home. The next day, Benedita walked the 3 miles to Creek Road to see her property in daylight. Mr. Thomas and Miss Joseph insisted on coming with her along with several others from their small community of formerly enslaved people. They wanted to celebrate, to see this victory with their own eyes. The house was exactly, as Mrs. Morrison had described, terrible. It sat on about an acre of overgrown land, surrounded by wild grass as tall as a man's waist. The house itself was a small structure, maybe 4 rooms at most, built of weathered wood that had once been painted white, but was now a mottled gray. The roof sagged in the middle. Several windows were broken or missing entirely, and the front porch had collapsed on one side. "Lord have mercy," Miss Josepha breathed. "That's barely standing." But Benedita saw something else. She saw potential. She saw home. She walked toward the house slowly, almost reverently. The front door hung on one hinge, creaking in the slight breeze. She pushed it open carefully, and it protested with a loud groan. The interior was dim, the afternoon sun filtering through cracks in the walls and holes in the roof. The floor was covered with leaves, dirt, and debris that had blown in over the years. There were cobwebs in every corner, thick with dust. The air smelled of rot, mildew, and abandonment. But it was hers. Benedita took a few steps inside, her worn shoes crunching on the debris. There appeared to be 4 rooms, just as she'd guessed. A main room that served as a living area, 2 smaller rooms that could be bedrooms, and what looked like it had once been a kitchen at the back. The fireplace in the main room was still intact, its stones blackened with soot from fires long gone cold. She walked through each room slowly, assessing the damage, making mental notes of what needed to be fixed first. The roof was the priority, then the windows, then the floor in the kitchen, where several boards had rotted through. It was overwhelming, but not impossible. She'd done harder things in her life. She'd survived slavery. She could fix a house. As she reached the back bedroom, the smallest of the rooms, she noticed the door was closed. All the other doors hung open or were missing, but this one was shut tight. Strange. She reached for the handle, an old brass knob tarnished with age, and turned it. The door resisted, swollen with humidity, but she pushed harder, and it finally gave way with a loud crack. The room was darker than the others. The single window had been boarded up from the inside, and only slivers of light crept through gaps in the boards. Benedita squinted, letting her eyes adjust to the dimness. And then she saw it. In the corner of the room, huddled against the wall, was a figure, small, child-sized. Benedita's heart stopped. She took a step back, her breath catching in her throat. Was it a body? Had someone died in here? And then the figure moved. A small face turned toward her, eyes wide with terror. It was a child, a little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, with skin as dark as Benedita's, hair in matted braids, wearing a dress that was little more than rags. She was so thin Benedita could see her ribs through the torn fabric. For a long moment, neither of them moved. They just stared at each other in shock. Then the child spoke, her voice barely a whisper, hoarse arrow, as if she hadn't used it in a long time. "Please don't hurt me. Please, I'll be quiet. I'll be good. Just please don't hurt me." Benedita's maternal instincts, dormant since her own children had been taken from her decades ago, came roaring back to life. She slowly knelt down, making herself smaller, less threatening. "Baby," she said softly, "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise. What's your name? What are you doing here?" The child trembled violently. "My name is Sarah. I live here." "You live here in this abandoned house. How long?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I don't know. A long time. After Master Pendleton died and the war ended, everyone left. The other enslaved people went away. But I had nowhere to go, so I stayed. I hid." Benedictita's heart shattered. This child had been living in this abandoned house alone, hiding, surviving on who knows what. "Sarah, honey, how old are you?" 9, I think, maybe 10. I'm not sure anymore. And you've been here alone all this time since the war ended. That's more than 3 months. I was scared, Sarah whispered. Master Pendleton's nephew used to hurt me before the war. And I was scared if I left someone would catch me and take me back, or someone else would hurt me. So I stayed hidden. I'm good at being quiet. I know how to hide. The words hung in the air like a physical weight. Benedita understood immediately what the child meant by hurt. The same thing had happened to so many women and girls during slavery. The same thing had happened to her. "Oh, baby," Benita said, tears streaming down her face. "You don't have to hide anymore. You're safe now. I promise you're safe. Are you the new master?" Sarah asked fearfully. "No, child. There are no masters anymore. We're all free. I'm just a woman who bought this house. And if you want, you can stay here with me. You don't have to be alone anymore." Sarah stared at her as if trying to decide whether to believe her. "Really? Really? I'm not going to hurt you. And I'm not going to let anyone else hurt you either." Outside, Benedita could hear Miss Josifer calling her name, probably wondering why she'd been in the house so long. Benedictita stood up slowly and extended her hand to Sarah. "Come on, child. Let's get you out of this dark room. Let's get you some food and clean water. You're safe now. I promise." Sarah looked at the offered hand for a long moment. Then slowly, trembling, she reached out and took it. Her hand was so small, so thin, so cold. Benedita helped her to her feet, and the child swayed, weak from malnutrition. "I've got you," Benedita said, putting an arm around the girl's thin shoulders. "I've got you, baby. Everything's going to be all right now." They walked out of that dark back room together, into the dusty main room, where light was streaming through the holes in the roof. And when they stepped out onto the collapsing front porch, Miss Joseph and the others gasped. "Lord above," Joseph breathed. "Where did that child come from?" "She was hiding in the back room," Benita said, her arm still protectively around Sarah. "She's been living here alone since the house was abandoned. She's coming home with me?" No one questioned it. No one suggested calling authorities or finding the girl's family if she had any. In that moment, they all understood. They were creating their own community, taking care of their own. This child needed help, and Benita would provide it. It was that simple. "Let's get her to my house," Miss Leafa said practically. "She needs food and a bath, then we'll figure out the rest." As they walked back toward town, Sarah leaned against Benedita's side, exhausted, and Benita felt something she hadn't felt in over 20 years since her youngest child had been sold away. She felt like a mother again. She had come to that abandoned house looking for a home for herself. She had found that, yes, but she had also found something more. She had found a child who needed her. A child she could protect, raise, love in a way she hadn't been allowed to love her own children. Maybe, she thought as they walked, this was why everything had happened the way it did. Why Yoim had died before freedom came. Why she had survived. Why she had worked so hard to buy this particular house. Maybe this child was the reason. And as they reached Miss Yusuf's house and began the process of caring for Sarah, feeding her, bathing her, treating the sores on her body from months of malnutrition and neglect, Benedita made a silent promise to Yukim's memory and to the children she'd lost. She would raise this child right. She would give Sarah the life her own children never got to have. This would be her purpose in freedom. Not just to own a house, but to fill it with love, to give this child a home, a family, a future. The journey was just beginning, and there would be challenges ahead. But for the first time since Joachim died, Benedita felt something like hope stirring in her chest. The first few weeks were the hardest. Sarah barely spoke, flinched at loud noises, and would sometimes disappear into corners, making herself as small as possible, as if trying to become invisible. She had lived in survival mode for so long that the concept of safety was foreign to her. But slowly, with patience and love, Benedicta and the women of their small community began to reach her. Miss Yusfa turned out to be a godsend. She had raised 7 children of her own before they were all sold away, and she knew how to handle a traumatized child. "Give her time," she counseled Benedicta. "That baby's been through things no child should endure. Her soul needs healing just as much as her body." For the first week, Sarah stayed at Miss Joseph's house, while Benedicta began the monumental task of making the house on Creek Road livable. She couldn't bring a child to live in that wreck. Not yet. Every morning, Benedicta walked the 3 miles to her property, carrying tools borrowed from Mr. Thomas and whatever materials she could afford or scourge. And every morning, a small miracle happened. Other people showed up to help. Mr. Thomas came with his carpentry tools and his expertise. "Can't let you do this alone," he said gruffly. "Besides, when you get this place fixed up, it'll prove to everyone in this town that we can do it. That we're just as capable as any white man." Former enslaved people from the surrounding area came, too. Men who knew how to repair roofs. Women who knew how to patch walls with clay and straw. Young people eager to contribute to something meaningful. They worked in exchange for meals that Benedicta and the other women prepared, or sometimes just for the satisfaction of helping one of their own. The White Town's people watched with a mixture of curiosity and hostility. Some muttered that it was a waste of time, that the house should have been torn down years ago. Others made cruder comments about uppity-freed men who didn't know their place. But a very few, surprised everyone. Mrs. Morrison, the widow who had sold Benedicta the house, showed up one afternoon with a wagon load of supplies. "I found these in my barn," she said, avoiding eye contact. "Leftover from when my husband was alive. Paint, nails, some good lumber. I have no use for them now. Thought you might?" Benedicta was stunned. "Mom, I can't pay you for these. I'm not asking you to." Mrs. Morrison finally looked at her, and Benedicta saw a deep sadness in her eyes. "My husband and my sons died fighting to preserve slavery. I thought it was right at the time. I thought that was our way of life, and it had to be protected. But now I see all the pain it caused. All the families torn apart. I can't undo what was done, but maybe I can help a little with what comes next." She climbed back on her wagon and left before Benedicta could respond. But the supplies stayed, and they made a world of difference. By the end of September, the roof was patched. The windows had been covered with oiled paper until they could afford glass, and the worst of the floor damage was repaired. It wasn't beautiful, but it was solid. It was safe. It was time to bring Sarah home. Benedicta went to Miss Yusef's house that evening to tell Sarah the news. The child had filled out a little in the weeks of regular meals. Her eyes had lost some of their haunted look, though the shadows remained. When Benedicta walked in, Sarah was helping Miss Josepha shell peas, her small fingers working methodically. "Sarah," Benedicta said gently, sitting down across from her, "the house is ready. Would you like to come see it? Would you like to come home?" Sarah's hands stilled. She looked up at Benedicta with those big, solemn eyes. "Home," she repeated as if testing the word. "Yes, baby, home. You and me will live there together. I'll take care of you, and you can help me with chores as you get stronger. It'll be our house, our family." "But I'm not your daughter," Sarah said quietly. I'm not anything to you." Benedicta reached across and took the child's small hands in her own weathered ones. "You're everything to me. I had children once, Sarah. 6 of them. 3 died young and 3 were sold away from me when they were about your age. I never saw them again. I don't know if they're alive or dead. For 20 years, I had a hole in my heart where my children used to be. Tears started flowing down Benedita's face, but she didn't stop. And then I found you, scared, alone, hiding in the dark. And I thought, maybe this is why I survived. Maybe this is why God kept me alive through all those years of suffering. So I could find you. So I could give you the love I couldn't give my own babies. If you'll let me, Sarah, I want to be your mother. Not by blood, but by choice, by love. Sarah's eyes filled with tears too. I had a mother once, she whispered. She was sold when I was 5. I barely remember her face, just her voice singing to me at night. Then let me sing to you, Benita said. Let me be your mother now. We both lost so much, baby. But maybe we can find something together. Maybe we can be a family. Sarah launched herself across the table into Benedita's arms, nearly knocking over the bowl of peas. She sobbed into Benedita's shoulder, and Benedita held her tight, rocking her like she used to rock her own babies so long ago. I want to go home, Sarah finally said, her voice muffled against Benedita's dress. I want to go home with you, Mama. Mama. The word pierced Benedita's heart with a joy so intense it was almost painful. Then let's go home, daughter. Let's go home. They moved into the house on Creek Road the next day. It was sparse. 2 straw mattresses on the floor, a table and 2 chairs Mr. Thomas had made, some pots and dishes donated by the women of the community, a few blankets, but it was theirs. That first night, Benedita made a simple dinner of beans and cornbread on the repaired fireplace while Sarah watched with wide eyes. I never cooked before, Sarah admitted. I was always too young. They said I'd burn myself or waste food. Well, you're going to learn now, Benita said. A woman needs to know how to take care of herself and her family. Come here. I'll show you how to tend the fire properly. They ate dinner together at their little table as the sun set, painting the sky orange and purple through their oiled paper windows. It was simple. It was humble, but it was peace. After dinner, Benita taught Sarah a song, one of the old spirituals from her childhood. Sarah's voice was thin and uncertain at first, but by the 3rd verse, she was singing stronger. When it was time for bed, Benedita blew out the candle, and they lay on their mattresses in the darkness. Sarah's was close to Benedita's, close enough that Benedita could reach out and touch her if she got scared in the night. Mama, Sarah's voice came through the dark. Yes, baby. Thank you. Thank you for finding me. Thank you for wanting me. Thank you for letting me love you. Benita replied. Now get some sleep. Tomorrow we start our real work. We're going to make this house into a proper home, and then we're going to plant a garden and maybe get some chickens and build ourselves a good life. Together. Together. Sarah echoed softly. And within minutes, her breathing had evened out into sleep. Benedita lay awake longer, listening to the child breathe, marveling at how quickly life could change. Just months ago, she'd been enslaved and her beloved Joachim had been alive. Now Joachim was gone, but she was free. She owned property and she had a daughter again. Life took away and life gave back in ways you could never predict. The months that followed were full of hard work, but also full of small joys. Benedita taught Sarah everything she knew. How to cook, how to clean, how to mend clothes, how to tend a garden. Sarah was a quick learner, eager to please, and she blossomed under Benedita's patient instruction and unconditional love. The garden was their first major project together. In October, they cleared the overgrown land behind the house, pulling up weeds and rocks until their hands were raw. Mr. Thomas helped them plow a section, and Miss Josepha contributed seeds she'd been saving. They planted collarded greens, turnips, sweet potatoes, and beans, crops that would grow well in Mississippi soil and provide food through the winter. My mama used to say that when you plant something and tend it, you're teaching yourself hope. Benita told Sarah as they worked. You're putting seeds in the ground and trusting that something good will come up. That's what we're doing with our lives too. Planting hope. Sarah absorbed everything like a sponge. But more than the practical skills, she absorbed love. For the first time in her life, she experienced what it meant to be valued, protected, cherished. She learned that she could make mistakes without being beaten. She learned that her needs mattered. She learned what family meant. The community around them grew stronger too. Every Sunday, the formerly enslaved people of Natchez and the surrounding area would gather at Mr. Thomas's carpentry shop, which doubled as a makeshift church. A preacher named Reverend Samuel, who had learned to read during slavery by sneaking looks at his master's Bible, led services that were part worship, part community organizing. Freedom is just the first step, Reverend Samuel would say, his deep voice filling the room. Now, we have to build. We need to buy land, start businesses, educate our children. We need to show that we're just as capable as anyone else, and we need to stick together, because there are plenty of people who want to see us fail. He was right about that. The initial euphoria of freedom had given way to harsh reality. Many white Southerners resented the loss of free labor and the new rights of black people. Violence against freed men was increasing. The Ku Klux Klan had formed and was terrorizing black communities across the South. Even in Natchez, there were incidents. A black man beaten for being uppity. A freedman's house burned down after he registered to vote. A woman assaulted on her way home from work. Benedita heard the stories and held Sarah tighter. She made sure to be home before dark. Made sure to keep a low profile. Made sure never to give anyone an excuse to target them. She'd survived 50 years of slavery by being smart and cautious. She would survive freedom the same way, but not everyone could or would live that way. In December 1865, news came that made everyone pause. The 13th Amendment had been ratified. Slavery was officially constitutionally abolished throughout the United States. It wasn't just a wartime measure anymore. It was the law of the land, permanent and unchangeable. That Sunday, the gathering at Mr. Thomas's shop was bigger than ever. People cried, people sang, people testified about what this meant to them. Reverend Samuel read the amendment aloud. And even though most people there couldn't read, hearing the words made it real. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as a punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. This is our foundation, Reverend Samuel said. This is what we build on. Our children and grandchildren will grow up in a world where slavery is illegal. They'll never know chains. They'll never be sold. We made it through to see this day, brothers and sisters. We survived to see this day. Benedita held Sarah close and wept. Her own children, wherever they were legally free now. She would probably never see them again, would probably never know what became of them. But they were free, and this child in her arms was free, and any children Sarah might have someday would be born into freedom. It was enough. It had to be enough. Christmas came, their first Christmas together. Benedita and Sarah didn't have much, but they made it special. Miss Joseph taught Sarah how to make sweet potato pie. Mr. Thomas carved Sarah a small wooden doll. Benedita sewed Sarah a new dress from fabric she'd bought with money from selling vegetables. It wasn't fancy, but it was new, made specifically for Sarah, and the child treasured it like gold. On Christmas morning, Sarah gave Benedita a gift, too. She'd been learning to write from Reverend Samuel, practicing with a stick in the dirt. She'd written Mama on a piece of brown paper in careful, shaky letters. It was the most precious gift Benedita had ever received. As winter turned to spring, life continued. The garden flourished. Sarah grew taller and stronger. The house became more comfortable as they added small touches. Curtains Miss Josepha helped them sew. A shelf Mr. Thomas built for their few dishes. Wildflowers Sarah picked and put in a jar on the table. But the outside world was changing too, and not always for the better. In early 1866, Mississippi passed the Black Codes, laws designed to restrict the freedom of black people and force them back into something resembling slavery. Black people couldn't rent land outside of towns without a white sponsor. They couldn't assemble without permission. Children could be apprenticed to white employers without their parents' consent. Vagrancy laws allowed police to arrest unemployed black people and force them to work. It's slavery by another name. Reverend Samuel said grimly. They're trying to put us back in chains, just using different words. The community organized. They pulled money to help people pay the new taxes designed to force them off their land. They made sure everyone had documentation of employment to avoid vagrancy arrests. They protected each other's children from the apprenticeship system. It was exhausting, infuriating, frightening, but they persisted. Benedita was grateful she'd bought her house when she did. Property ownership gave her a protection that many others lacked. She had documentation. She had legal title. It was harder for them to push her out. But she knew how fragile that protection was. She knew that at any moment violence or legal maneuvering could take it all away. One night in March, there was a knock on their door. It was late, well after dark, and Benedita's heart jumped into her throat. Late-night knocks rarely meant anything good. She grabbed a knife from the kitchen and approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" she called. "It's Thomas. Open up quick." She opened the door to find Mr. Thomas standing there with a young man she didn't recognize. The stranger was bleeding from his head, his shirt torn, his face swollen. "They beat him," Mr. Thomas said, helping the man inside. Klan came to his house because he tried to register to vote. Burned his place down, beat him, told him to get out of the county. He needs to hide for a few days until we can get him north. Benita didn't hesitate. "Bring him in. Sarah, get water and clean quick now." They tended the man's wounds while he told his story in a hoarse whisper. His name was James. He'd been freed from a plantation in Alabama, had come to Mississippi hoping to build a new life. He'd saved money, bought a small piece of land, registered to vote, and for that he'd been targeted. "They said I was getting too big for my britches," James said bitterly. "Said I needed to be taught a lesson. Said if I wasn't gone by morning, they'd kill me. You can stay here tonight," Benita said firmly. "Tomorrow Mr. Thomas will take you to the next town. We have people there who can help you get further north." James looked at her with tears in his eyes. "Why? Why would you risk yourself for me? You don't even know me." "Because we're all we have," Benita said simply. "We have to take care of each other. That's how we survive." James stayed hidden in their house for 2 days while arrangements were made. Sarah remarkably didn't seem frightened by the situation. She helped tend his wounds, shared her food, even made him laugh with childish jokes. The trauma she'd experienced had made her stronger in some ways. Benedita realized she understood that the world was dangerous, but she also understood the importance of helping others. When James left, heading north with a wagon train organized by the community, he clasped Benedita's hands. "I'll never forget this. If I make it north, if I build something for myself, I'll find a way to pay it forward. I promise." "Just live," Benedita told him. "Just live and be free. That's payment enough." As spring turned to summer, the garden produced abundantly. Benedita and Sarah had more vegetables than they could eat. so they sold the surplus in town. Some white customers refused to buy from black vendors, but others, desperate for fresh produce, swallowed their prejudices and paid. Every penny went into Benedita's savings. She was planning ahead, thinking about winter, thinking about emergencies, thinking about Sarah's future. One afternoon in July, a well-dressed white woman approached their vegetable stand in the town square. She looked at their produce critically, then at Sarah. "Is this your girl?" she asked Benedita.
"This is my daughter." "Yes, ma'am."
The woman's eyebrows rose.
"Your daughter? How old is she?" 10, ma'am." Sarah answered before Benita could. "Can you read?" Sarah hesitated, glancing at Benita. Admitting to literacy could be dangerous, but Benedita nodded slightly. "Yes, Mom," Sarah said. "A little. Reverend Samuel has been teaching me." The woman studied Sarah for a moment, then turned to Benedita. "I'm Mrs. Elizabeth Hartwell. I'm opening a school for Negro children. The Freedmen's Bureau is providing some funding, and I've been tasked with finding students and a teacher. I'm thinking your daughter might be one of my advanced students, and you." She looked at Benedita appraisingly. "Might be exactly the kind of woman I need to help run it." Benedita was stunned. "Mom, I can't read. I was never taught. But you're intelligent, organized, and clearly dedicated to children. I can teach you to read. It's never too late. And we need someone from the community, someone the parents will trust. Will you consider it?" It seemed impossible. A school for black children run partly by black adults, and she was being asked to be part of it. Benedita looked at Sarah, whose eyes were shining with excitement. "I'll consider it, ma'am," Benedita said carefully. "May I think on it and give you an answer in a few days?" "Of course. You can find me at the Freedmen's Bureau office on Main Street." That night, Benedita and Sarah talked long into the darkness. A school would mean regular work, a small salary, a chance to help other children. But it would also mean visibility, which brought risks. It would mean time away from their home and garden. It would mean trusting white people who might have their own agendas. "What do you think, Mama?" Sarah asked. "I think it's an opportunity, but it's also a risk. Reverend Samuel says that freedom means we have to take risks. That hiding and staying small isn't really freedom at all." Benedita smiled in the darkness. Her daughter was wise beyond her years. "You're right, baby. You're absolutely right. We'll do it. We'll try." 2 days later, Benedita went to the Freedmen's Bureau office and accepted Mrs. Hartwell's offer. She would help run the school, assist with younger children, maintain the building, and coordinate with parents, and she would learn to read alongside the children. The school opened in September 1866 in a small building that had once been a warehouse. There were 32 students that first day, ranging from age 6 to 16. Some came from town, others walked miles from surrounding farms. They sat on rough benches, wrote on slates, and shared the precious few books Mrs. Hartwell had managed to acquire. Benedita was 54 years old when she learned to read her first word. It was free. Mrs. Hartwell had written it on the board, and letter by letter, sound by sound, Benedita deciphered it. When she finally spoke the word aloud, the whole classroom erupted in applause. She cried and she wasn't ashamed. Sarah excelled in school. She had a hungry mind and absorbed everything. Within months, she was reading at a level far beyond her years. She helped teach the younger children, showing a patience and gentleness that made her a natural educator. Mrs. Hartwell said Sarah had the makings of a teacher herself someday. The school faced opposition, of course. Some white townspeople complained about educating above their station. Someone threw rocks through the windows. Someone left a threatening note on the door. But the Freedmen's Bureau stood firm. Mrs. Hartwell stood firm, and the community protected the school like it was sacred ground, because it was. It represented hope. It represented a future. On Sarah's 11th birthday in March 1867, Benedita did something she'd been planning for months. She went to the courthouse with Mr. Thomas as her witness and legally adopted Sarah. The clerk tried to discourage her, saying it wasn't necessary, that informal arrangements were fine for your people. But Benita insisted. She wanted it legal, documented, official. When she walked out with the adoption papers, she handed them to Sarah. "You're my daughter now. Not just in our hearts, but in the eyes of the law. You're Sarah Johnson, and nobody can ever take you away from me." Sarah held the papers like they were made of glass. Forever. Forever. That night, they celebrated with a small party. Miss Josepha made her special sweet potato pie. Mr. Thomas brought his fiddle and played music. Reverend Samuel led them in prayer. It was a gathering of people who had all lost so much, but were building something new together. A community. A family by choice. As Benita looked around at the faces of the people who had become her family, at the daughter who had become her purpose, at the simple but sturdy house she owned, she felt something unexpected. Gratitude not for the suffering, never for that, but for having survived it. For being here now in this moment. For getting to experience freedom even if it had come so late. For getting to raise a child in that freedom. For getting to see what came next. "Yoim," she whispered to the night air, after everyone had gone home and Sarah was asleep. "I hope you can see this. I hope you know I'm okay. I miss you every day, but I'm okay. We made it, my love. We made it to the other side." The years continued to pass. Sarah grew into a beautiful, intelligent young woman. She became a teacher herself at 15, helping Mrs. Hartwell with the younger students. The school expanded, adding more children, more resources. The black community of Natchez slowly, painfully built economic and social structures that would sustain them through the coming decades of Jim Crow and segregation. Benita lived to see Sarah marry at 19, a good man named Thomas Jr., Mr. Thomas's nephew. She lived to see her first grandchild born, a baby girl they named Benedita in her honor. She lived to see that child learn to read at age 5, something that had been denied to Benita until she was 54. On a warm evening in May 1875, when Benita was 73 years old, she sat on the porch of the house on Creek Road, holding her granddaughter in her lap. Sarah was inside preparing dinner, her belly round with her second child. The garden was flourishing. The house had been expanded and improved over the years, and the deed remained safe in a metal box under the floorboards. Little Benedita looked up at her grandmother with curious eyes. "Grandma, tell me a story." "What kind of story, sugar?" "Tell me about when you were young. Tell me about the old days." Benita looked out at the land she owned, the home she had built, the family she had created from ashes and pain and impossible hope. She thought about all the stories she could tell about slavery, about loss, about Joachim, about the day she found Sarah, about learning to read, about building a life from nothing. "The old days were hard, baby," she finally said. "Harder than you'll ever know, harder than I hope you'll ever have to understand. But I survived them. And because I survived, you're here. You're here and you're free, and you can read and you can dream, and you can become anything you want to be. Did you always know things would get better?" Benita smiled. "No, baby. Most of the time I didn't know. Most of the time I just had to trust, had to hope. Had to keep putting one foot in front of the other, even when I couldn't see where I was going. But you know what I learned?" "What?" "That sometimes the darkest moments lead to the brightest blessings. That sometimes you find exactly what you need in the most unexpected places. And that love, real love, doesn't need blood or papers or approval. It just needs two hearts willing to choose each other." Little Benedita didn't fully understand, but she snuggled closer, content, and Benedita held her. This child of freedom, this granddaughter who would never know chains, and felt a peace settle over her that she'd never thought possible. She had been enslaved for 50 years. She had lost her husband, her children, her youth, her health, but she had also survived. She had found freedom. She had found a daughter. She had found purpose. She had found home. The house on Creek Road stood solid and strong, a testament to what could be built from ruins. And inside it, love lived. It had lived there from the moment Benedict opened that back bedroom door and found a scared little girl who needed her. It lived there still, in every meal shared, every story told, every generation raised to be strong and free and full of hope. As the sun set and Sarah called them in for dinner, Benedita stood slowly, her joints aching with age, but her spirit unbroken. She took her granddaughter's hand, and they walked inside together into the light and warmth of home. And Benedita thought this. This was what freedom truly meant. Not just the absence of chains, but the presence of love. Not just survival, but the chance to build something beautiful from the ruins of what had been destroyed. Not just an ending, but a beginning that would ripple forward through generations. She had bought an abandoned house to have a place to rest her weary bones. But she had found so much more. She had found her daughter. She had found her purpose. She had found her way home. And that was the story of Benedictita and Sarah. Two souls broken by a brutal system who found each other in the ruins and built something beautiful together. Was it destiny or just chance? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe there's a greater purpose in life's unexpected moments? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe, hit that notification bell, and share with someone who needs to believe that new beginnings are always possible. And I'll leave you with a recommendation for the next video. Click here to watch it now. I guarantee you won't regret it. Made with by glass